Hey kids, it's Pastor Tony, and today's lesson is the next lesson in our series called Simple Stuff, where we take a look at all the stuff we see around us every single day, and we figure out how that stuff can remind us more of who God is, what He's like, and how we can be like Him. So if you're ready, let's go talk about some stuff. For today's lesson, we're going to talk about handwritten notes. The kind of notes that you actually hold something in your hand and you write it down. Not the kind that you type, not the kind that you text, but you handwrite a note. Think of all the places that we write notes on. We write on paper. Maybe it's a whole piece of paper or just a scrap of paper, but we write a handwritten note. Or a card. We sign the inside of maybe a thank you card, a birthday card, and when you're older, you write somebody a love card with your own handwriting. Sometimes people just grab a napkin and they'll write a note on a napkin because it's quick to use. It's really close if you're sitting in a restaurant. Sometimes we even write handwritten notes on our own hand because our hands are always with us. We're not going to leave them somewhere and forget it. So we might write down a quick note, something we want to remember, or a phone number, or a fact that you need to know for school if you're doing a report. Your teacher at school probably writes on a whiteboard. They put handwritten notes, things you're supposed to do. Maybe at church they use a whiteboard. Even at home, some people have a whiteboard that's their to-do list and they write down their notes. Sometimes in the bathroom at home, the mirror gets really foggy and you reach up there with your finger and you handwrite a note or draw a picture for somebody else. You can even write on glass, just like you would a whiteboard. Those special kind of markers, don't use a permanent marker. It has to be a special kind of marker to write on the glass. And the walls, of course, you can write on the walls. About a year ago, I decided that I wanted to write all over one of the walls in my office. This was a huge blank wall. Why did I write notes all over it? I even wrote down the reason why. Because I was bored with a blank wall. I was tired of staring at a blank wall, and I remembered that for several years I had been recording on my computer, on pieces of paper, several different quotes that I found. Little tiny notes that I thought, these are really cool, I want to remember them. Some of them, they're reminders to me of things I should do and of things I shouldn't do. They encourage me or they inspire me to do things differently. So as I stared at this blank wall, I thought, you know what? It's just a blank wall. It's painted with normal paint. I'm going to take a Sharpie permanent marker, a bunch of them, and just start writing all over the walls. Now don't you just look at your wall and say, I'm going to write all over my wall because Pastor Tony did. You got to ask permission first, just like I did. And then you could maybe, if your parents let you, you could fill up your wall with handwritten notes. Did you know that there is a story in the Bible that tells us of a time when God, with His hand, wrote a note on a wall so that the king would know what was going to happen? Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but it's a story that's part of the life of Daniel as we read through the Bible. Now, the last few lessons, we've talked about Daniel. Remember, Daniel was from the land of Israel, but King Nebuchadnezzar from Babylon sent his army to attack the army of Israel. And when Babylon's army won, as they were returning home, they brought treasure with them, but they also brought several young men who would end up serving the king. Daniel was one of the young men brought back to Babylon. And when he arrived in Babylon, he spent 3 years training with other people, training to learn the language, the customs, learning how to serve the king. And during that time, King Nebuchadnezzar was so impressed with Daniel and 3 of his friends that he made them special advisors to the king. Well, later, the king had a dream that really bothered him, really confused him. And Daniel was the only person in the kingdom who was able to tell the king his dream and tell the king what the dream meant. He was able to do that because God helped Daniel. Because of that, King Nebuchadnezzar put Daniel in charge of all the wise men of Babylon. That's a super important position. In that position, Daniel continued to serve King Nebuchadnezzar. And King Nebuchadnezzar had another really strange dream that Daniel helped to interpret. But eventually, King Nebuchadnezzar dies, and his son becomes the king of Babylon. His son's name was Belshazzar. One night, Belshazzar decides to throw this huge party. He invites like 1,000 special guests, and as they are all together partying, he decides that he wants to use some of the cups from the treasure that Babylon had stolen from Israel. He wants to celebrate that Babylon, we are the best kingdom in the world. Even the good stuff of other kingdoms, it's just like a regular cup to us. That's how good we are. During that party, God delivers a handwritten note to Belshazzar. And Belshazzar has no idea what the note says. Maybe you've heard this story before. Maybe you haven't. Keep watching to see what happened.
Many years passed, and Daniel, now an older man, was still in service to the kingdom of Babylon, when a new king, Belshazzar, came into power. King Belshazzar decided to host a great banquet for thousands of his leaders. During the feast, King Belshazzar had his servants bring out the gold and silver goblets that his father, King Nebuchadnezzar, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem. As the king and his nobles drank from these sacred goblets, they praised false gods. Suddenly, a human hand appeared, and one finger began to write on the wall right in front of everyone at the feast. As King Belshazzar watched, he began to shake in fear. The king called for his wise men and said, "Whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means, I will give them riches and power." But the wise men could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant. This made the king even more terrified. Hearing the commotion, the queen came into the banquet hall and said, "Don't be alarmed. There is a man who can help you. He was trusted by King Nebuchadnezzar because of his great insight and wisdom. So much so that Nebuchadnezzar put him in charge of all of Babylon's wise men. His name is Daniel, and if you bring him here, he will be able to tell you what this writing means." When Daniel appeared before King Belshazzar, the king told him, "None of my wise men can read the writing on the wall and tell me what it means. But if you can, I will give you riches and honor beyond your wildest dreams." Daniel answered the king, "You can keep your gifts and give them to someone else, but I will still read the writing for you and tell you what it means." Daniel told King Belshazzar, "God gave your predecessor, King Nebuchadnezzar, absolute power, glory, and splendor. Because of this, all the nations of the earth feared him. He did as he pleased to help or hurt anyone he chose. But Nebuchadnezzar became proud and arrogant, so God stripped him of his throne and his power. Only after this did King Nebuchadnezzar acknowledge that God alone is king over all the earth. But you, King Belshazzar," Daniel continued, "have not humbled yourself, even though you knew all of this. Instead, you have become proud and honored yourself above God. When you brought out the goblets from God's temple, you drank from them and praised false gods who cannot see or hear or understand. In all of this, you did not honor God or his hand in your life. Because of this, God sent the hand and wrote the inscription." "My king," Daniel said, "this the inscription says, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. Mene means numbered. God has numbered your days and brought them to an end. Tekel means weighed. You have been weighed on the scales, and you have been found wanting. Parsin means divided. Your kingdom is divided and will be given to the Medes and Persians." Just as the king had promised, Daniel was dressed in wealth. That very night, King Belshazzar was killed, and his kingdom was given over to another ruler.
Okay, think about this. If you were at that party and suddenly a hand appeared in the room, not attached to anything else, just a hand showed up and started writing in big letters this huge note across the wall, and you realized, I don't know what that hand's attached to. I don't even know what that note says. How would you react? Would you stay in the room? Would you run? Would you faint? Would you kind of look around at everybody else trying to figure out, am I the only one who saw it, or did you see it too? And then imagine if you were Daniel. You're brought before the king, and the king says, look, I heard that you are one of the wisest men. Tell me, what does this note say? Daniel knows what it says. And Daniel knows that he has to talk to the king and tell the king, here's what you've been doing wrong. Here's how you've been sinning against God. Would you be brave enough, like Daniel, to talk to somebody, to tell them, here's what you've been doing wrong? I had to do that a couple times. Well, I didn't have to. I chose to when I was younger. And that was a hard choice to make. I remember 2 times that stick out in my mind. And look, just because I did this, it doesn't make me anything special or a better Christian. I'm just telling you my experience of having to talk to friends to tell them, you were wrong. We should stop. One time, I was with some kids from the neighborhood. And the neighbor who lived behind our house, he invited us all to come up, and I think we had Freezy Pops, and we were sitting around a table on the deck. And as we were talking, we were making jokes. And pretty soon, the jokes, they kind of became some jokes we shouldn't have been making. They weren't horrible, but they weren't the right kind of jokes we should have been telling. And I remember they're sitting there with my friends, eating my Freezy Pop, thinking, I'm with these people. I should tell them that what we're doing is wrong. I know that's what God wants me to do. But I'm so nervous. If I say something, are they going to laugh at me? Am I going to be allowed to play with them again tomorrow? What's going to happen? How are they going to react? And then without giving it any more thought, I just blurted out. I stood up and I said, hey, we shouldn't be making those kind of jokes. Those aren't right for us to be making. They looked at me and they laughed and they said, oh, you think you're better than us? I was embarrassed. I was so embarrassed. I felt like I had done something wrong. I was ashamed. I walked away, and as I was walking home, I thought to myself, no, I didn't do anything wrong. Even though my friends made fun of me, even though they reacted like that and they made me feel bad, I didn't feel bad because I did what God wanted me to do. Just like when Daniel stood up to Belshazzar and said, you are wrong. Then there was another time. This time I was in 4th grade. The teacher, she kind of stopped the class and she said, okay, let's go ahead and take a bathroom break. And so all of us left to go to the bathroom. And when we came back, I was the second person to get back to the room. Nobody else was in the room except one of my friends. Not even the teacher was there. And he went up to her desk and there was a little container of candy on the desk. And I saw him start to eat as many pieces of candy as he could before anybody else could come back. In that moment, I thought to myself, as I stood by the door, kind of looking in, kind of not, I thought, what am I going to do? This is one of my best friends. I should tell him what he's doing is wrong. Oh man, I don't know. I chose not to say anything until later. And I went to my friend and I said, hey, look, I don't know if you saw me, but I saw what you were doing. And I told him what I saw. And then I said, I'm going to tell the teacher about what you did. But first, I want to give you a chance to talk to her and to apologize for what you had done wrong. I said, I'll give you, however much time, and then I'll go tell her if you haven't. My friend, he went and told her what he had done wrong. And he came and he said to me, thanks, Tony. That was wrong, and I'm really glad you pointed that out to me. Oh, I didn't know how he would react. I didn't know what our friendship would be like. I didn't know if we wouldn't even be friends anymore. But I knew that that was what I was supposed to do, to point out to others, this is what you've done wrong. That's what Daniel did. No matter what the consequence would be like, Daniel said, King, you are wrong. And this is the consequence, and here's what you should do. Even though the king laughed and said, no big deal, whatever, it'll never happen. Daniel still did what was right. That can be hard if you have to stand up to your friends or tell your friends, you're wrong, you need to change. You can be embarrassed. You can feel like you did something wrong. But Daniel, he did what was right, and you should too. So this week, if you find yourself in a situation where you think, I should probably tell my friend or my family member, hey, what you're doing is wrong, God says no, then tell them. Focus on making sure that you're doing what God wants, no matter what the consequences, no matter how others around you react. And in doing that, you'll become a little bit more like Jesus this week. So go this week, learn more about who God is, what He's like, how you can be like Him. And then you can be more like Jesus and be a better example to others around you, which is exactly what God wants us to do. Before you go, why don't you read some of the things I wrote down on my wall? Maybe you'd like what they say.